What does the goddamn line say, Tony?
Please do not use gendered language.
Then what? I'll be arrested, put in airport jail?
Look, you're going completely sideways, man.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
How dare you?
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
I'm Chris Hansen with Dave on NBC.
Jack Marius Tack-Theratrix.
Hi, I'm Spartacus.
Jackson, Sacramento, he, him. Steven Seagal.
Sex offender guy.
I'm Keith Morris.
This is Mumbai Kutapi.
I'm Rick James, bitch.
Sorting through the lies.
The hijacker's passport was found blocks from the World Trade Center crash site, if you can believe that.
We cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
And uncovering the centuries-long plan for world domination.
Learning about Cuba, having some food.
Let's talk about Chinese people.
Have you ever been in a Turkish prison? Swangles and Fort Lauderdale?
I have sent 6 of my Libyan missiles to blow up the Sears hardware department.
Nothing could be more fun than jumping off a cliff with 2 German bisexuals.
Oh, you English are so superior, aren't you?
Thank you, comrade.
And now, Macroaggressions.
That's what assholes call it.
With your host.
Buddy, I don't know who you are, but you're about to get chlamydia.
Charlie Robinson.
Hey, Whitey, where's your hat?
You want to drop the blame on Charlie and say it's all Charlie's fault.
He was a retard.
I get some goddamn diuretic.
Welcome to Macroaggressions. I'm your host, Charlie Robinson. If you're watching us on Iconic or Rockfin, or you're listening wherever podcasts are served, we certainly do appreciate your support. We know you have a million choices out there. Thank you for spending time with us. And if you like the show, please share it with your friends and family. It's the only way that the word's going to get out. We could not do this show without the amazing support of our sponsors. My Patriot Supply has been nice enough to create our own little website for us. It's preparewithmacroaggressions.com. You can go through that website and access everything that My Patriot Supply has for sale. They have emergency survival food. They have survival items, water filtration, air purification. My God, if you lived through 2020, and you aren't thinking about getting prepared, you need to have your head examined. So take a look. Go to preparewithmacroaggressions.com, and that'll get you to My Patriot Supply. They've been a supporter of this show for the last couple of months. We certainly do appreciate it. It allows us to do the things that we need to do and talk to the people that we want to talk to. So thank you to them. And speaking of people that we want to talk to, I have been, I've been a fan of Dean Henderson for a while, since I heard you on Richie Allen. And then I would go on Richie Allen, and I would always be like a couple days behind you. And every time you went, I remember listening to it. So author Dean Henderson is here. Dean, nice to meet you virtually. I've been a fan of your work for a long time. Thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Oh, man. Thanks a lot, Charlie. I really appreciate you having me. And yeah, cool.
You sent me your book, Big Oil and Their Bankers in the Persian Gulf. And, these days, I know that the media is lying to us. I understand they're making up narratives. They're kicking off false wars. But back when the first Gulf War started in 90, the run up to it in 90 and the actual war starting in 91, I was a freshman in college. So I did not know what I did not know at that point. So now when I'm looking back on things, I see the agendas clearly here, and the from 9/11 on, I can see them. It's pretty obvious. But I was not paying attention back then. I was watching CNN as Bernard Shaw was hiding under the bed when the rockets were coming in, and everyone was switching the helmets when the sirens were going. But so I know that I was being lied to, based on just experience with these people, but I don't know the depths of what the lie was. Fill me in on how that war that, whatever it was, I don't know if it was a war, it seemed kind of one-sided, but how that thing kicked off, what was real, what was actually happening in Kuwait, and what was just media manipulation in order to get us to accept this.
Yeah, well, that was the whole, April Glaspie letter that they sent, to Saddam, telling him that they weren't gonna, basically indicating they weren't gonna respond if he invaded Kuwait. And so he invaded Kuwait, but actually what happened was Kuwait had already invaded Iraq because they were using Santa Fe Drilling, which was a CIA oil drilling, horizontal drilling company. Because if you horizontal drill, you can go under a border. Mm-hmm. And so it's this, good old oil companies at work with the CIA. And Santa Fe Drilling was horizontally drilling into South Ramallah in Iraq, one of the biggest oil fields on earth. And so, Saddam said, all right, then. And he just basically pushed the troops back, and it wasn't really much. It was done. And then there was, of course, all the babies on incubators, which, girls on incubators, which turned out to be a total fabrication by, I don't remember which PR firm was hired by. There it is, Hill and Knowlton, a good one. And so it's all manufactured. And then, of course, we did invade Iraq. It wasn't much of an invasion. It was more of maybe the first real use, although it was used some in Vietnam, of electromagnetic weaponry, where they sort of beamed this message to these Iraqi troops, millions. Everybody was nervous. It was going to be this. We were a lot of people here. I mean, I was in grad school, and I remember thinking, man, this isn't going to be a pushover. This is going to be a real battle here. That's a lot of troops Iraq's got, and they're battle hardened against Iran and all this stuff. And yeah, it should have been. And then, to everyone's amazement, these troops just kind of gave up and laid down, and some were just obliterated, and they couldn't find the bodies. And apparently they were using this voice to skull technology, which is the precursor to 5G, and beaming these people a message that said, Allah wants you to surrender. And it is the best research I've come across. And yeah, it was something weird. Everybody knew it was something weird that was going on there. So this begins the kind of mainstream maybe rollout, although they did use this in Vietnam along the DMZ actually too, to do some things and do some weather things too in Vietnam. But yeah, it was all just a fabrication. And then of course, what happens, Iraq at that time had taken a left turn under Saddam, who had traditionally been working for the CIA. He helped assassinate El-Karim Qasem, president, before him, for the CIA. His handler was Bruce Odell of the CIA. I even have that in my book. And clearly he was a right-wing kind of fascist nut job. He was going after the Shia. He was going after the Communist Party. All of a sudden, and then all of a sudden the Iraqi people sort of weighed in, and he had become a member of this American Iraqi Business Forum, I think it was called. Henry Kissinger was the head of it. And it was all the big corporations, AT&T, ExxonMobil, you name it. And they were privatizing the Iraqi economy. They're trying to. But it was Saddam took a left turn and actually began to side with his people. He got out of that forum, and he became more of a nationalist. And just like Noriega, or just like any other dictator that we've used and then dropped over the side when they went the other way. And that's what happened. And so people don't understand that before the war in Iraq in 1990, there was actually, like state-owned farms and collective farms and, warehouses where like all the communal potatoes were stored, or the communal wheat or whatever for the year. I mean, it was a very socialist communist economy, and it had been for quite some time. And Saddam was trying to change that. The people didn't allow it to happen, basically, and like they never have in Iraq. I mean, Iraq. One thing you have to understand about Iraq is that the tradition of communism is deep, and it goes back to the mid '50s when they got rid of the king and nationalized for the first time ever. They were the first country in the world to ever nationalize one of the crown's oil companies, their tentacles. And it was before that, it was Iraqi Petroleum Institute. And after that, they nationalized the oil company, and it stayed on to, till the point of the war. And actually it still is, but it's heavily contracted now but there still is that tradition where they wouldn't let go of that. Just like Pemex in Mexico, same thing. Which is what we should do in this country with ExxonMobil and Chevron. Nationalize them and just then we can steer our energy policy where we want it to go, into renewables, and wherever else, and away from this war-driven oil economy, because it's all in the Middle East. But anyway, so that was all just, and then of course in the ensuing, I think 2 quarters, big oil's profits were up like 600% on average, because they were suddenly supplying oil to not just the Americans, but to the Iraqis as well, through contracts. Again, they would produce the oil, but we would ship it, or we would, it would be our tanker, ExxonMobil's tankers or storage facilities or whatever it is, and then selling guns to both sides. So the defense contractors, of course, had a huge boom during that time. And we basically, Iraq was really important because it was a socialist, successful Middle Eastern country. That was an example we could not have, just like Yugoslavia was an example we could not have. Serbia was an example we could not have. Well, really Yugoslavia before that, in Europe, and ever since Tito. And so they were also successful. They were socialist. They were in both of these countries were involved in Comecon, which was this thing where you barter things. So the Yugoslavs would barter their, whatever their Yugo cars for these Iraqi tractors that were pretty hot shit, and and that was really circumventing the corporate globalist control of the planet. And they didn't like that. So they had to go after Yugoslavia. They had to go after Iraq. They had to go after Syria for the same reason, and still are going after Syria. They had to go after Libya, of course. And because Gaddafi was way beyond all this stuff, it was an anarcho-syndicalist and was leading this whole kind of global South effort, against the cartels and the banks. And so they did a lot in the Middle East, obviously, and it all, where did it come from? Well, the war on terror, which was the pretext to do all this. And now the war on terror has turned into a war on just humanity with this COVID-19 operation. And this is an operation. It's covert identification 2019. We're going to identify everybody. We're going to get inside you. We're going to now just take your whole body and just atomize and objectify and break it down and put it under a microscope and know everything about you, just like they've done with the natural world over the last 8,000 years. These Nephilim, which we'll get into, I'm sure. Yep. But that's what's going on. And so the war phase, I think, like in the Middle East, we've pretty much conquered the Middle East. We've knuckled under, not we, but the crown. We've knuckled under, countries like Egypt. We've got countries like Sudan, which we just sponsored a coup in to get rid of al-Bashir, because he was one of the people that didn't allow a private central bank in his country. So there was no Rothschild central bank in Sudan. That's one that people don't know. They know Cuba, they know Iran, but Sudan was a real kind of rogue country. That's why they set up the whole the fake Darfur massacres and the fake refugee crisis and everything, because they were going after Bashir. Well, they finally got rid of him. So now the Sudanese have signed an Israeli peace deal, along with the Egyptians, along with the UAE, along with everyone thinks probably next will be the Saudis and the Kuwaitis and everybody. And so they're coming out of the closet, really, is all it is. They're admitting this relationship they've had for years, because you have to understand that the crown is also in the Middle East, and that's the House of Saud, and in Kuwait, the House of Al Sabah, and in Oman, and in Bahrain, and in United Arab Emirates. These are all kingdoms. These are all monarchies that are part of the crown, not just, but they're there to do the bidding of the city of London, basically. And they send all their revenues to the city of London, all their profits, and they own Western corporations now, these sheikhs. They own a lot of the world economy. They own big chunk of Citibank, actually. Yep. The sheikhs do in the Middle East. And they've intertwined these. It's a global thing. I always say, and I've said it from the beginning of my blog, it's a global oligarchy. That's what I still think that best describes what we're dealing with, a global oligarchy. And then if you want to get into the bloodlines and whether or not these things are human, then you can go there. But even if you aren't comfortable going there, fine. Just understand that this is a global oligarchy of these tight-knit families that work together, and that there's really no nation state anymore with the power to stand up to this thing and that their base is in the city of London, geopolitically, and that their wealth repository is Switzerland, and specifically the Bank of International Settlements, run by kind of the Hohenzollern crown family runs that. They all have little tasks, the crown families. You'll find it's interesting. But Queen Elizabeth plays the harp, so she runs harp. And if you look at their logo, there's a harp on it, and she's in charge of the mind control harp program, along with there's one other family involved with them, and I'm trying to remember, Aldobrandini's, I believe, which is the Italian black nobility from the old Holy Roman Empire days. And the Aldobrandini's, for example, marry into the Rothschilds. And they intermarry. And so, people say, how many families is there? Well, some people do say 13. Fritz Springmeier said 13. Gary Wayne said 13, but I tend to think it's a loose number. And if anything, the actual bloodlines are probably smaller than 13 now because they're so interbred. The Habsburgs, the Bourbons, the Merovingians, they've the Vicis, the Rallas, the Anjous, the Plantagenets, the Collins, the Sinclairs, they've interbred to the point where really the blood is, it is one big happy family, and they're inbred, and that's why they talk about the Habsburg chin, where it's like a crooked chin. There's actually it's a common thing. They talk about this Habsburg chin because they're all inbred. Harry kind of has it because his daddy's a Habsburg, actually Prince Harry, but it's his dad's King Juan Carlos of Spain, not Prince Charles. That's pretty much widely known in the European, circles. But so yeah, I don't know the number, but 13 is possible. And I think what I'm seeing right now with the COVID is interesting is the shift to the east and sort of the Khan families picking up the slack here with the Aga Khan Foundation, training all the Islamists for British intelligence. The Khan family. Every president of India has descended from that bloodline. The current Pakistani president is a Khan. He can be seen in pictures with Lord Mountbatten and hanging out in the city of London. And the Li family has a bigger role now. The Chinese Li Red Dragon family and the Yamamoto family is coming back into play, and the Singh family, which the Sikhs are a part of, and if you've noticed the Shah family, the Shah of Iran, and that's a whole other dynasty, and King Zaire Shah of Afghanistan. Remember when we first went into Afghanistan, the first thing we did was reestablish the Loya Jirga, which was the monarchy, pretty interesting before anything else. And so they were back into the drug trade, which the crown controls, and all the wealthy families in Afghanistan, the oligarchs, they run the opium trade for sure through Turkey with the Grey Wolves mafia and into Europe and, whatever else. And the Chinese, going the other way. It's the triads who are, pretty much a subsidiary of the Freemasons and also working for this crown. But what you're seeing is a little bit of, to me, a shift to the east, like the crown internally. There's something going on where the Asian component of the crown is going to be more preeminent or more active. And that makes sense because geopolitically, the crown and the city of London, to me, are leaning to China. And they actually have sort of invented China. I mean, China is just this thing that, it was a Maoist revolution, there was a cultural revolution. And then as soon as Deng Xiaoping came in there, Mao himself called him a capitalist rotor. He said he's going to sell you out. Sure enough, in 1973, he signs a détente with Kissinger, with the globalists. Part of the deal is one child, one male. We need them in the factories, kill the females, leave them at the markets, which brutal policy, this one child policy that I think Kissinger was influential in because he's a huge depopulation guy. And it happened right then. So, and anyway, meanwhile, Taiwan, they did steal all the gold. And Chiang Kai-shek was working with the CIA and the crown too. So he was a bad guy. Mao, I'm not sure. Some people say, connect him with the bad guys. I don't know. His wife, I think, with doing the Cultural Revolution was where it got really crazy. And that's what they do. A lot of times they'll sponsor like they did in Afghanistan, when they went after Takiri, was it Takiri, the leftist president of Afghanistan. And they put this CIA guy, Deep Mole, into his government. And they did this kind of radical land reform where they were seizing property of people, not compensating them, just being crazy and go over the top. See, and this guy turns out, he was CIA, and Brezhnev is the guy that identified him as CIA. And that's when the Soviets came in. They realized that there was a coup going against the socialist government of Afghanistan, which was what that was. Again, same thing. And so it's all about counter-revolution. They can't have revolution. The Crown is their model of economics is a medieval model, Middle Ages. They love that kind of stuff. And I think what they're working on now is what I call electronic feudalism, where it's going back to feudalism, but now you're going to be sitting in a relatively comfortable but very small apartment with a lot of devices, and you're going to be competing with people all around the world, not just in China and Haiti now, but everywhere, to be the fastest Bitcoin miner or to be the fastest programmer for Amazon, writing code for Google, or and it's going to be like that, and they're just going to go to tokens, and it's going to go to electronic currency, and the currency, what we know of as currency is going to be different, and digital probably, of course, in the end. And I mean, if they can pull this off, it's always in history been, with this Crown, and when they get the technology, this has happened before, and when they get the high technology, that's when bad things have happened, and like the golden age. Turns out it wasn't so golden, and there, and then the flood came, and I mean, and that was the technology. It was whatever they used to build the pyramids, whatever they used to build Machu Picchu, whatever that was, that enslaved humanity. That taught the Aztecs to do blood sacrifice, because they didn't do it before that. See, that's the thing. They weren't naturally like that, and that's one of the biggest real society lies. Is that somehow the Indians, they were such savages. They actually weren't. And, the British Crown and the Spanish Crown and the French taught them
that we're savages.
And Kit Carson, they paid him per scalp and so nobody was scalping anybody until the Crown came along, and they did it because they wanted to, count the scalps and see how many Indians. And that was the way they did it. Sometimes they cut off a hand or something, maybe. But, and then, later when the Indians were pissed off, I suppose they scalped a few, settlers, but this was all foreign to them. They were like, what are these things? They call them, Apache called them Watikos, and the Lakota here where I'm from, they call them Witkos, which means crazy, Tashunka Witko is crazy horse, and, but they didn't mean crazy like in a good way,
right.
These guys. And, the Cree up in northern Canada called them Wendigos, and the Muslim called them Jinn, and the Sumerians called them Anunnakis, and the Egyptians called them pharaohs, and Jesus called them the Holy Roman Empire that killed him. And it's just been this progression into the city of London of these, whatever these are, and 8,000 years is my timeline that I have that this has occurred. But I think we're nearing the end of the oil age now, and we're going to be moving into this electronic communication, 5G, fourth industrial revolution, and that's where the money's at right now. That's where the big data, which is epitomized by Serco, the company. Everyone should just go to their website, look at their historical timeline. It's a little movie you can watch. It's pretty enlightening. And this is a Crown company, but they're very powerful, and there's other companies contracting. It's all become, when they privatized everything ever since Reagan, they've been able to bring in these contractors into government, and even into our military, where we privatized our military with Blackwater and things like this. And that's all kind of a British feudalist, mercantilist model of the East India Company, where you set up a middleman, and, they would buy spice and just be the middleman and move back and forth and, pay very little and sell very high. And that's what we're seeing now with the contracting of everything, the privatization of everything. This is not some, as some in the alt-right would argue, this is not some great giant socialist conspiracy. They're trying to make it look like that because it's a marketing thing, and they have to sell us on this idea that we're all in this together and it's a collectivist thing. But if you look around you, what's really happening it's just the opposite. You're seeing the 1% increasing their wealth, increasing their concentration of wealth. Most people falling through the cracks, middle class going away, becoming the U.S. economy, becoming more like a Bangladeshi economy probably in the long run. And then God forbid what happens to Bangladesh. I mean, people are probably just going to be starved out and, deliberately vaccinated and killed. I suppose that's what they've done. And then the vaccination, of course, is a big part of this. And I think it plugs in somehow, turns us into kind of antennas for the 5G. And it really does take you into the cloud in a way. And it really does. It's a transhumanist movement, the whole thing.
Yeah. And you were talking about the end of oil. And I saw something a couple of months ago that made me think of you when I saw it on the news. And now I've got you here, so I want to get your opinion on this. What was the purpose behind taking Aramco public now, out of all times? Was this a move made out of desperation by Saudi Arabia? Was this were they trying to just cash in one last time before the oil paradigm changes, or what are we to make of of taking this public? And what was I guess at the time the biggest
they did take it
transition
public,
into
right?
a public company
and
ever.
And they did take it public, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I thought so.
In Riyadh they did for $2 trillion.
$2 trillion, right? Well, there you go. I think you just answered your own question. $2 trillion, But and that was a weird deal because everybody said it was this state-owned oil company. But see, when I did my master's thesis, which was about big oil, and that's what turned into Big Oil and their bankers. That began as a 144-page master's thesis, and the whole thesis is in that book. It's just chopped up in different chapters, in between there's stuff about, stuff I learned later. But, what I found out was as of, it would have been 89 was when I started, maybe 91 at the latest, was that Aramco was not publicly held, was not owned by Saudi Arabia. The shareholder, one of the biggest shareholders was Exxon Overseas Limited, is 28.33%. And I can only assume that probably the other three oil companies, the giants, the four horsemen, as I call them, which is Royal Dutch Shell, BP, Amoco, Chevron, Texaco, ExxonMobil, probably had a share because that's always been the history in Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's when SoCal first found the oil in Saudi Arabia in the 30s. That was Chevron, SoCal, Southern California, whatever. Standard Oil of California. And when they found that, they instantly cut in those guys, those other friends of theirs, and it was private for years. And then they said, "Oh, we've nationalized it." But yet, like I said, even after the date they said in their Aramco glossy brochure that they nationalized it, I found that it was still owned by ExxonMobil Overseas Limited. So hard to say. Regardless, all the contracts, again, for shipping, for marketing, for refining, for chemical, Saudi Arabia is just loaded with chemical plants. I mean, so like Royal Dutch Shell Plastics Polymers Division, and then that's where they really cash in, is in the downstream market of the oil. Anyway, and that's where the big money's at anyway. And that includes things like, aviation, so there's automobiles, obviously. So there's everything really does come from oil up to now. And that's what's changing with this fourth industrial revolution. But I just think, it was a lot of money. $2 trillion, that's a lot of money. And officially, now it's okay. If it was in some way nationalized, now it's not again. Now it's back in the private sector, which is, again, that's where these medieval crown people want to be. They don't want anything public, really. They'd rather have you paying to go to the library pretty soon and, get on national park trails, which you're already doing, national forest trails even, and now in a lot of states, not here, but in the West Coast, I hear, in Washington, Oregon, California, you got to pay to hike. I mean, there's nothing public. There's nothing public anymore. So it makes perfect sense that they would re-privatize Aramco if indeed it was, at least at some level, controlled by the Saudis. And I think that was just part of, MBS and Trump kind of hit it off. And, that was part of it too. I think Trump probably talked him into it because it'll be who it'll be. It'll be the Rothschilds and the same, Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley that bought those shares that, control them like they control everything on Wall Street. There's 5 companies that are interesting: BlackRock, Blackstone, Fidelity, which is FMR also, and Vanguard and State Street, First Boston. And these are companies that still, if you look at the Fortune 500, they're in the top 10, usually in the top 5 or 6 shareholders of every company. Bank of New York Mellon's another one. But these are like bank holding companies of bank holding companies. And I still haven't got to the bottom of who actually controls these 5 companies. And they control Citibank and Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley and everything else too. But these were what I think, and I don't know how you'd even prove it. You can't prove it right now because the Bank of England sits on these accounts for every offshore haven. And I'm pretty convinced anyway that these companies are the crown. This is the crown's money. This is how they really control the whole American economy. Big oil, big bank, big pharma, big everything, just through these 5 shell companies. And interestingly, like State Street, First Boston, that's the old Boston Brahmin, Sutherlands, the Forbes, the people that were running the East India Company and running the slave trade and bringing the opium in to the East Coast, the Perkins family. So yeah, I think there's, and yeah, you find out like Biden's, one of his great grandfathers was, worked for the East India Company and stuff like that. And it gets pretty interesting. So yeah, it is about bloodlines. There's something about Biden they like right now. And I think it's just because they'll go along with whatever in the techs, and big tech is behind this guy. They wanted Trump for a while, which is why they put him in there. Cambridge Analytica, Facebook, I do believe that the crown was behind him. They were totally spying on him, monitoring, but they backed him and rigged that election for Trump. And then now they rigged this election for Biden because they want to build back better. I mean, that slogan that he uses comes from World Economic Forum, and which, by the way, is run by Lord Mark Malloch Brown is the vice chair. Everybody talks about Klaus Schwab, but Lord Mark Malloch Brown, much more interesting guy. He's on the Queen's Privy Council, and he's also sitting on the board of Dominion Voting Machines, Smartmatic, Diebold, and he also started the Open Society Foundation of George Soros, has been running for years. He started it, and then Soros took over. Now he's going back to head it again, and he was, he's really. Yeah, but that just shows you who's running the show. So all this World Economic Forum, Bilderbergers, Trilateral Commission, whatever it is, Council on Foreign Relations, these are all fronts for the crown in the city of London. And that's where all the big money goes into. It just goes into the city of London. It goes into the offshore banking network. There's hundreds of trillions of dollars that if nation states could actually get a hold of in tax, at least we'd all be solvent. This country would be 27 trillion paid off. I mean, seriously, there's so much money, and that all started with the Eurodollar, and in the 60s, and they started, up until I think it was Reagan, you couldn't even, like a corporation couldn't take money out of the U.S. unless it was to buy goods or to facilitate the selling of goods, and then they had to repatriate it. Well, the Eurodollar changed that. And that put the city of London back on kind of, British mercantilist mode, East India Company mode, where all this oil money, all this drug money, all this trafficking money, all this whatever money just dumps into the city of London. There's no transparency. There's no regulation, totally opaque. You don't know what's what. And it just goes into the offshore networks under numbered accounts that only the Bank of England knows, but which I suspect these 5 companies are very much involved with getting it at least over there. And it disappears down the offshore toilet, and there's no productivity coming from that money anymore. No. There's nothing of value that's added to the economy anymore. The IMF is a partner in that thing because they'll loan a country a bunch of money. They'll give half of that money to some corrupt official, and he'll repatriate it to the city of London and to the offshore network. Then the IMF will privatize things in that country and do absolutely nothing to help the people, but then build the country for the debt, the so-called debt.
This is what got me going down this rabbit hole back in 2007. Was John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where he laid out the plan, the IMF and the World Bank coming in and extending credit to these countries that can't afford it, to build a hydroelectric power plant that doesn't ever pencil out, like it was never going to. And then when they fall behind on their payments, they come in and extract something from them, an agreement to
usually
privatize their lumber industry or fishing industry, or build a U.S. military base, or vote their way in a UN resolution, or some shitty deal that they didn't want, but they get muscled into this. And I saw, I've watched this documentary twice actually, called The Spider's Web. You might have heard of it.
Yeah, I saw
about the city of London and the bank and the offshore banking, and they make the case that the overt rule of the British Empire went away back in the 50s or 60s, and that the more covert means, it went underground and became this network of, Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Guernsey, Jersey, all these offshore banking havens that the British set up, and though their fingerprints are still, all over the offshore banking, they give the appearance that they're not still colonizing the world, yet they are in a more covert way through their financial systems.
Right, exactly. It's just a more sophisticated version of British Empire, and but it's still there. It never went away. It's, the Commonwealth certainly plays a big role in it as well. When the Queen has the ability to basically get rid of an Australian prime minister, which she did in 1975 with Gough Whitlam, who was trying to set up a minerals kind of a producer cartel to go up against Reynolds Aluminum and Alcoa and Xstrata. Well, that wasn't in there at that time. That's a relatively new crown tentacle, but Glencore, whoever, these Rio Tinto, trying to go up against those guys and get a fair price for, because Australia has a lot of minerals. I mean, it's like,
China's noticed,
coast, depending how you look at it, with a lot of minerals. So she actually, appointed a new governor general, John Kerr, and got rid of the governor general even, and then got rid of Whitlam. And that's the power of the crown right there. Yeah. And, so it's so funny how, and then they'll try to tell us, these are just figureheads. Right. Well, when you can overthrow a government of Australia just with the signing of a piece of paper, I guess, that's not, that means you actually have quite a bit of power. So it's a joke. And it's the same with the money. You can't know how much they own. So people think, Sam Walton's or his kids are the richest, or, Bill Gates or whoever. But in fact, these people, no, they're far, I believe, wealthier and Gates to me, and like Elon Musk and these guys, they're basically crown agents, kind of like Rockefeller was. He was a gopher for the Rothschilds, really. And these guys are gophers for the Rothschilds, or now I would call it the crown, because I think that's a more apt term for it. But they're just doing the bidding, and that's, knight of the British, knight commander of the British Empire, Bill Gates, and Royal Society member Elon Musk. And so there you have it. So, and if you look at the fingerprints of COVID, it's all about the Pirbright Institute, and it's all about Burroughs Wellcome Trust, which these crown charities, which operate Wuhan, operate all over the world with these things. It's all about General Electric. It's all about the smart meters, which are essential to the smart grid that they're setting up. It's all, which is a crown agent company, which Serco came out of. Actually, Serco and GE, I'm sorry, that's not right. Serco and GE came out of RCA, right? And so then RCA had developed sonar, been involved with the Kennedy hit, really close, actually, with David Sarnoff was the head of it at that time, and they provided cover for FBI Division 5 agents who were under cover for British intelligence, like Guy Bannister, and they did the hit. It was Sir William Stephenson that orchestrated the Kennedy assassination out of Jamaica, Tyndall compound, because Jamaica still has a very British Crown sort of contingent, we'll say. But it's all about Crown Castle, which put up almost all the cell towers here and in England and many places. And Berkshire Hathaway helped them get into the U.S. So Warren Buffett is some way complicit in this. And they have changed their name to Akiba now, but they're on Fleet Street in the city of London. That's their headquarters. They're a Crown Agent Corporation. Lockheed Martin, British Aerospace, building the space fence and ionizing space, Crown Agent Corporations. As far as Big Pharma, you have GlaxoSmithKline, GSK, and you have AstraZeneca. Moderna is a virtual mirror of AstraZeneca, so it's also a Crown control company. And as far as the board members, GSK also owns a big chunk of Pfizer, it turns out. So it's, they're going to clean up. The Crown's going to clean up off of this vaccination. They're going to put their companies in a better position because they've all gone online already, and they're pushing everything online, and they're going to knock out the competition of the middle class of the United States and Europe, the entrepreneur class, make them dependent on them, kind of like they've done with the lower class, and kind of like, and they don't mind that. They need an underclass, and they don't really care about a middle class. The British have always been very careful to knock down the competition. So they did it to Germany. I mean, way before Hitler, they did hyperinflation, and Germany was coming up with some really good technology, Mercedes-Benz, stuff like that. I mean, they're good engineers, the Germans, and that freaked out the British Empire. So the Anglos were like, no, we got to take them down a notch. So they created the hyperinflation. They actually had relations with Hitler, where he came to the Tavistock Institute somewhere in the 19-teens. And Tavistock is a Crown controlled thing in the city of London, Chatham House. It's their mind control operations center. And it's where they steer cultures like American music culture.
Yeah, I've always called it the culture factory, because it seems that's where they create the trends and promote all that stuff. And I was in London like 18 months ago, and I did one of those double-decker bus touristy type things where you get up on the top and you go through. And I was kind of half paying attention, but I got the feeling I knew when we had entered the city of London. And for those that are unaware, there's London itself, and then there's what is known as the City of London, which is like a 1 square mile city within the city that's kind of like a Washington, D.C., or kind of like a Vatican. It's sort of in and of itself. And I could tell when we got there, because the artwork and the statues were very mumuch concerned with reptilians and dragons, and it seemed to be, I got the feeling that the dragons were protecting the gold. And I remember popping up and going to my wife, we must be inside the City of London. She's got the little headphones on. She goes, yeah, we are. How did you know? And I said, there's dragons everywhere. And she goes, what does that mean? I go, I don't know, but somehow I have to ask Dean Henderson what that means.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've seen the pictures of those. And it is interesting. I mean, they have the whole Freemason thing, where every bank in the city has its own lodge, and the Lord Mayor has his own lodge, and and then you have this thing where in Freemasonry, where Lucifer is their they like Lucifer. They think he's the light bearer. That's just what they believe. And Lucifer is a fallen angel, and fallen angels are the Nephilim. And it just seems to me that what's up with all the symbolism about dragons, and what's up with there's so many things, and it's everywhere. It's all around the world. Anywhere you find monarchy, you'll see the same thing in Thailand. When you're looking at the king or queen, the king's castle, or home, or whatever it is, temple, whatever, and then look at the AMA and the logo of the American Medical Association and the snake, and that was, of course, Rockefeller's invention that bumped aside naturopathy and homeopathy and replaced it with allopathic medicine, drugs, and cut people up, do surgery, give them drugs, and as far as their holistic health, forget about it. No money in that. Yeah, and so there's so much to that, and I'm by no means, an expert, but what I do believe is that it does go back to Samaria at least, and the Anunnaki, the Nephilim, according to the Sumerian clay tablets, which we at least have a history of, we at least have that written down. And for years, people didn't take it seriously. They were like, "That's crazy." They do that, like if you're black or brown, your myths are just kind of crazy and they're just myths and they're just stories. But if you're white, it's by God, it's the Bible,
Right.
It's the Bible, literally, it's the Bible, right? So, which of course isn't, it's all the same. But anyway, they say, they were enslaved into agriculture by these Anunnaki. They came here, they did DNA experiments. They needed gold to patch up their atmosphere, the ozone on their planet. And it was at the same time when the mines started appearing in South Africa and the Michael Tellinger's little circle things that he talks about. And it was at the same, and then shortly after that, you had the thing, Machu Picchu, and you had Angkor Wat, you had all these huge, stone things that indicate, worshiping the gods, pointing towards heaven. And instead of, before that, it was animism, and we knew we were from here. We didn't look to the heavens for the answers. We looked right here for the answers. Right. We're from here. But then here comes these aliens, these Nephilim, and they're telling us, "No, you're from heaven. You're from there. You're from outer space. You're from." And then maybe we are, if we were DNA experimented on, partly even, And so there's that. And who knows who was and who wasn't? I think there's both, somewhere. And I think the ones that were can still unclog the pineal gland, and decalcify it and be just fine. But there was something going on, and from there, after pretty much enslaving mankind into agriculture in Mesopotamia, which is Samaria. Then they proceeded to Babylon. They proceeded to Egypt, built the pyramids, developed the mystery schools, which Freemasonry, Kabbalah, Muslim Brotherhood, they all come out of that, thing. And the idea was to guard the knowledge from the people. So before that, the people probably knew all about the lizards and all about everything, how to heal themselves, what plants, everything. And then they started hiding the knowledge under the guise of religion or, spirituality or like a cult or whatever. And that's what they're into. And so it's interesting that you have this nexus in the city of London between the money of the world, all derivatives trade from there, all offshore banking emanates from there. The banks vote. You can't be a city councilor or an alderman without being a freeman or a Freemason. And they all have, and they all have that. They all have the Freemason lodge. So there's a spiritual component to this, or at least a historical component where they know something that they are guarding the secret of, and that's what it is. It's the bloodlines. It's the cross, which indicates the cross between the Nephilim bloodline, I believe, and the human bloodline. So the red cross, kind of this obsession with DNA, obsession with bloodlines. The fact that the crown does have different blood, largely Rh negative blood, 85% of them, and very few other people have it. And the ones that do are in the Basque region in northern Spain, southern France, where the royals did come together in the 10th, 12th century, did a lot of intermarriage, and then kind of moved off to the British Isles and off in different directions. But did decide that the United Kingdom was going to be their place where, as a united kingdom, they would rule the world, because it had a rocky shoreline, like Venice. It was hard. Venice was on the shipping lanes too. When they first moved there from Rome, got kicked out, by the Catholic Church. The Templars moved their stuff up there, and then from there they had to have a seaport. But British Isles even better, because it's very rocky and defendable against the hordes of humanity that might feel like you're ill treating them, which they were. So they did develop it as the United Kingdom. That's what they meant by that. And but now, if you look at City of London and if you look at the bloodlines, it's not a British thing. There's some British, there's some Scottish, Irish. There's a lot of Italians. There's a lot of Germans, a lot of French. Really, a lot of Italians, probably more than anything, that actually run. Actually are the bloodlines and run the city. But but they're all dispersed all over the world too. Like I say, the King of Thailand is a part of this bloodlines. Kings and queens everywhere, and that's why the simple thing to do is, we have to have some kind of global movement to get rid of monarchy. We don't have that problem in America. We do have it covertly because they run the Federal Reserve, they run Congress now with all the contracting. They're increasingly controlling everything. So we need to get them off our back, but how can we do that if they're still heads of state in these countries? So that these countries that have monarchies need to get rid of them. It's just such an antiquated, stupid. Come on, man! It's the 21st century, So nobody gets to get born into the world with a special bloodline and get a free ride just because of that. It's just not how we operate. We're a meritocracy.
It's crazy, and I think people are dismissive or they roll their eyes when you hear bloodline families or blue bloods, these things. It's like, but there is history about this. This isn't just us, speculating and making this up. What makes it even more obvious that this is true is that it matters to them. It might not matter to us. We might roll our eyes at the idea of bloodlines, but watching their reaction to it, their overcompensation, they're very protective of this. They act in a way as if this is the most important thing in the world, and maybe they know something we don't know. I mean, as a course of standard operating procedure, they tend to hide things from us that they don't want us to know. So I don't know why this would be any different. So my point is, it's easy to be dismissive of concepts like bloodline families because it sounds stupid to us, but their oversized reaction to it makes me think that there is a whole lot more to it than we might be, and to be fair, they could set it up in a way that, of course, it sounds preposterous, like, oh, you blue bloods and royal bloodline families. Oh, what's coming next? David Icke's reptilians? And it's like, maybe, perhaps there's something more to this. The Rh negative component of the blood, and the history of people that have that having red hair and some sort of thing. It's like, I'm not a historian. I don't know the ins and outs of this, but there are far too many people talking about very specific items with regard to blood and bloodlines, Rh negative, things like that make me think that there's more to this story than what the casual observer might think. Is there a whole lot more to this?
I mean, I think there is, and again, you're so right that it doesn't really matter, what we think, if it's weird or if it's true. It doesn't really matter, does it? Because to them, they obviously, I mean, when you talk about the Holy Grail, you're talking about, the Sangreal, you're talking about the royal blood, and all these myths going way back, and they are obsessed with it. Obviously, we didn't even know, like, DNA. We never talked about DNA in this world until 20 years ago, maybe? And all of a sudden DNA everywhere, and it started with the genomics, the Human Genome Project, which was, again, a Rockefeller funded thing. And this actually, if you look back, this may have been the first sort of foray into the fourth industrial revolution, because you have to be able to identify the DNA of the people. Two reasons. One, if you're controlling the planet and you are, and it is by bloodline, and your blood is blue or royal or Sangreal or whatever you say it is, it's up to you. You're related to Jesus, I hear, and everything else. So if that's true, then these people would want to identify other people in the population who have that blood, because me or you think that would be, why would you do that? Well, because they're fascists. This ideology, this obsession with bloodline, it pretty much by default, they become fascists. And they believe everything is sort of, automaton physiology, dependent on your parents, whatever, and all this stuff, and which is nonsense if you ask me, but that's what they believe. Mm-hmm. And, so they're doing it for two reasons. They're obsessed with it to try to weed out, who they think will be akin to them because they have the blood, and maybe they'll be better, middle managers or, some sort of toady in the pyramid structure.
Right.
And then also it's going to be a huge moneymaker because that's what the fourth industrial revolution is all about. So increasingly, you're going to see this obsession with bloodlines, which kind of goes hand in hand with the sort of the uncovering of the veil off of the, I can't call it anything but like a Luciferian cult, which is emerging through the COVID crisis. You know, like the vaccine is like the sacrament, you know, that we're all have to take the sacrament, you know, and if you don't wear a mask, you're a sinner. And, you know, if you don't social distance, you're a sinner. And you know, if you go into the Capitol building, I'm so much better than you. I'm so much more superior than you. And I feel good about that. And it's just this bizarre time where there's all this virtue signaling about nothing. And then if you look at what actually happens, and so it's part of the initiation into the Luciferian cult. And I think the internet has really sadly accelerated that, along with television. I mean, you can't underestimate the role of television. It's still huge. But now being interactive, that people can actually think that they're using their own brain to go somewhere, search for something, but in fact, they're being fed lies by Google. You know, try to type my name in on Google and see what happens. Yeah. I used to be at the top of the heap, you know, for 5-6 years in a row. And this is what's happened. You know, all my YouTubes are deleted. This may last a week. If you do YouTube, Charlie, hope you have other platforms. I don't know what they are. I'm sort of becoming more of a Luddite and getting away from computers, realizing that it was really the trap. It was the spider's web.
The Unabomber was right.
Unabomber probably was right. You know, let's face it. And I was in Montana when they got him, and my sister's like, "God, I'm glad that wasn't you, man." I thought it was going to be you.
Well,
but
you know,
but anyway,
I feel like you do a lot of great work on oil, of course, as part of this. I mean, you're in a variety of topics, but oil and the mining, the drilling, the collection of oil. And it seems like these days it's the new oil is data. And that is the same sort of methods that they're using for extracting and corralling all of the oil is the same sort of methods that they're using for extracting and corralling all the data. You start to see some of the same groups involved. I get very nervous when I see the Black Rocks and Blackstones of the world coming in and buying things like Ancestry. I'm very nervous when obviously I know the relationship of 23andMe to Google and the Wojcicki's being involved in running of that. So as we move into this new world order, or this, build back better fourth industrial revolution, maybe oil is on the way out, but data is replacing it as the most valuable commodity around.
Yeah, that's it. And I think we're going to be turned, the goal of their project is literally to turn us into batteries, and that you won't need oil anymore. You won't need that sort of energy anymore. What you're going to depend on now is, literally mining Bitcoin, and literally just wasting your time doing something on a computer that helps giant corporations make money and getting really virtually nothing for it, and thinking that you have freedom and thinking that this is really where it's at. And just this huge energy suck. So it's really a human, like Catherine Austin Fitts said, I think she said it the best I've heard, is we're moving from an oil, a petroleum based economy to a human based economy. Mm-hmm. And that's what's going on. They're going to mine us now. I mean, they've mined the hell out of the earth and, trees and minerals and oil and whatever. And now they're going to mine us as individuals and make distinctions between us, big ones, because you have to compete. It's just capitalism, and these opportunity zones are part of this that just have been recently coming out. And Alison McDowell is I really like what she's saying. She's hitting the nail on the head. Right. Stuff. Yeah, she's really good, and she's right. And And that's what's so important, I think, for people to realize. Again, it's not some socialist takeover. This is a purely laissez-faire capitalist, bordering on feudalist thing. And when it does go open bloodline, that's when we'll go, feudalism, and it could have to do with something in Jerusalem with the Third Temple. I don't know. It could have to do something with Prince William. I don't know. The fact that they did say they're, Merovingians are related to Jesus, and he's got Merovingian blood because King Juan Carlos has it. And King Juan Carlos, kicked out of Spain. Pretty interesting. Got involved with the Mexican railroad corruption scam, and he's in exile. He had to leave his own country. So the royals are on the ropes a little bit here. The bloodlines are on the ropes a little bit here, and that's the other thing that's going on with the COVID, or the acceleration of the COVID agenda, which is really lockstep. You can just call this lockstep. And now what they're waiting for, they've already got the lockdown, but what they're waiting for is that lockstep, where everybody will march in single file to this shit. And it's not going to happen, obviously. And so that makes them more freaked out and double down. And they'll, like, for example, they'll never admit that they were wrong. That, look, which state had the biggest lockdown, most restrictions in the United States? Oh, that was California. Guess what? California is like a death camp of COVID right now, apparently. South Dakota, which what do we do? We didn't lock anything down. We were one of the 3 states that didn't. North Dakota and Tennessee were the others. And then North Dakota did actually do a mask mandate. In Tennessee, a lot of cities and whatever, but we didn't do it. And so we had a bad thing for a while. We got through it. I think we had 138 cases yesterday. People don't wear masks here. They're healthy. They exercise. Nobody's tripping. Nobody's like pointing fingers and, my side's better than your side because I wear a mask. Because I don't wear a mask, I could care. Go ahead. But I'm not going to be the part of the cult. And anyway, they'll never admit that our numbers are crashing and things are getting better because we have herd immunity now. We let it run through the young people and the healthy people. I probably had it in September. My guess. My wife and I both think we probably had it. Do we go to the doctor? No, hell no. Take vitamin C, eat good, same as I would do with anything. And I'm not getting tested because the PCR test is part of the scam. It's part of the identification of your DNA prop. It's a big part of the whole thing. So I'm never going to get tested. Forget it. And so that'll mean I can't fly, and that'll mean a lot of things. And then the vaccination. And then this is what we're coming up into now, Charlie, is just, we're going to find out like what people like us will be able to do, in this new society. And it really depends how many people resist, how many people refuse, to take the vaccination. Is a big one. And so we're going to find out, but at least we're going to find out pretty soon, right? And that's one good thing about it. But it's all a scam. It's all part of the agenda. Everything they do is for an agenda. And this is definitely for the fourth industrial revolution agenda, the global reset agenda that this COVID was this fake COVID thing was put out there. And so yeah, and it will accelerate it, and they had to go there pretty fast too, because the banks in September of last year, we were hearing that the repo windows, the banks, they were opening the repo window with the Fed, and that the interbank lending rate was like 10-15%, and Deutsche Bank was on the ropes, and JP Morgan Chase was on the ropes, and so they had to do some sort of shock. And I do think if that hadn't happened, if COVID hadn't conveniently come along, in other words, the stock market would have probably crashed in March anyway, just like it did without COVID, and then they were able to do a shock, and they were able to increase the move towards Zoom, and the move towards Uber, and the move towards DoorDash, and all the stuff that they own and that comes along, telemedicine, teleeducation, all the things they control. And that's why, of course, the market's going up now, because the corporations are loving this. And it looks like, at least for a while, they're going to be able to make money on this thing. How long they'll make money on this, that's the whole thing. This is one giant experiment. So if it fails, which we hope it does, then then things are going to crash out bad.
Yeah.
And that still could happen because I think these people are not thinking straight either on a lot of things. And they somehow seem to think that that they can have this big economy, this new fourth industrial without consumers, and that's not going to be true. So how are we going to get consumers? And is it going to be a universal basic income? And then if we have the universal basic income, what happens to the national debt, which is 27 trillion? How do we pay for that? How are you going to get around that? Where are you going to get any kind of production from the humans? What are the humans going to do? They're just going to sit around and so it's really it's not a sure thing. It's not a slam dunk. Let's just say that. And you could easily see this whole thing come off the rails, and the 5G not work out, and the vaccination kill people, and the satellites fall from the sky, and you could easily see that still. And that's probably our best hope because the humans, a lot of them disappoint, not all of them, but a lot of them are inspiring too. But, I'm just saying it's disappointing to see who's folding immediately.
There's a lot of people outing themselves, showing who they really are. I'll tell you what, there's nobody I would rather share a FEMA cell with than Dean Henderson. You can check out his books on Amazon, Big Oil and Their Bankers in the Persian Gulf, Nephilim, Crown 5G Apocalypse, and Illuminati Agenda 21. Dean, you're the best. Thank you so much for coming on and explaining some very complicated things in a simple way that makes sense to everybody. I appreciate it, and thank you so much. And everybody listening, if you like this show, if you thought this was great, share it with your friends and family. It's the only way this is going to happen. Thanks, everybody.